Hello everybody, welcome. My name's Andy. I head up the BBC's voice and AI team. So basically I have one of the coolest jobs in the world. I help people speak to robots and I help robots speak to people, which is really, really cool. This is brilliant. Love it. So I spend most of my time thinking about how the BBC is going to exist in the future. So what are the emerging mediums that are going to start to come out with that we can communicate really with audiences in an entirely new way? So it's much more about step change and sort of discontinuous innovation, which is where we go. Now, voice is a particularly interesting area because we at the BBC, first of all, we're very well known because we do a lot of things, and what was just talked about around how, it's still going to be a mixed economy, right? There's still going to be a need for screens. I mean, you're not going to watch TV without a screen, are you? So there's a huge, huge need for it. But what we are starting to see audience behaviours shift to now is this shift from, we now live in smart homes, we have smart speakers, we drive smart cars. And as you saw from like Amazon's, and wandering into buying them all, new projects, we're slowly starting to sort of like immerse ourselves in this ambient digital environment. And all audience behaviours are now starting to shift. And I can give you, as we go through the presentation, I'll start to give you a bit of a flavour around the size and the scale of that kind of shift and why the BBC is taking it so important. So a little bit about the BBC. So we have a weekly audience reach of 426 million people. So the most interesting thing about that is that the vast majority of the BBC's audience is not in the UK. The BBC is a truly, truly global player. So, of that, we've probably got 60 million who sit here in the UK. Everybody else exists outside of the UK. So we were born in 1922 and we are the world's oldest broadcaster. And, based up in Old Broadcasting House in near Oxford Street. And, interestingly, the BBC has this very, very big heritage in technology. The first person that was ever employed by the BBC was a radio producer. Employee number 2 was an R&D engineer. So engineering sort of sat at the heart of the BBC for so long, so much of a period. So we are a scale business. So, we service like 230 million iPlayer requests a month. Which, to sort of put into perspective, is actually some of the largest online streaming you'll find anywhere in the world for any particular event. So even if you take like major sports events, the sheer scale of what we do, if you take the US market, because the TV and broadcast industry is so fragmented over there, then actually the BBC tends to hold more simultaneous streams than any of the major US broadcasters that kind of go out. So we are truly like one of the biggest, most world-class broadcasting people in the world. But the BBC does not just exist to like entertain, and I mean, okay, strictly that's in our mission: inform, educate, and entertain. But we don't just exist to do that. We're not here just to ship content and programs at people. The BBC is supposed to have a societal impact. That is why it is funded uniquely. It is supposed to sit free of various forms of interference to ensure its independence. So, if you think about what happened with plastic in the oceans and how much of a common thing it is now, Blue Planet 2 was the program that was broadcast all around the world that's made the biggest shift in behaviours about driving people and raising awareness of that issue. And again, if you start going much more into what the BBC can really do, it's our ability through our programming to make fundamental changes in society. If you think about gender equality and how many companies can truly make an impact in sort of gender equality and where we go, well, you do something like this.
Oh my god, here it is!
I'm so not ready.
Hugely excited for this.
Oh.
Please be someone good, please be someone good.
Who is it?
Oh my god, here we go.
Wait a minute.
What?
Oh my god! Yes!
It's a girl. A girl? The new doctor is a girl?
Oh my god!
No way!
The new star of Doctor Who has been revealed.
Female Time Lord.
Jodie Whittaker.
Jodie Whittaker.
Jodie Whittaker.
The first ever female Doctor.
Oh my god!
was amazing.
Oh, that got me so excited.
It'd be nice if they cast a woman.
Oh God, you've already got Doctor Who and the Ghostbusters. Leave us something.
She has such heart and humour and soul. I'm fully behind Jodie.
I can't think of someone better to join the gang.
Oh, brilliant.
This is a new era for Doctor Who.
Yeah, that was a night. But that is just a sign of how the BBC can make impact into society, and why its position as the UK's and probably the world's biggest and most successful broadcaster really sits at the heart of all technology environments, because ultimately we are essentially creating sort of people with content and the knowledge that is contained within the digital world. So obviously what the BBC is most famous for is our kind of our news and current affairs. And as we said, that extends out to an audience of some sort of 400 million people worldwide who at some point tune in to consume content from services such as BBC World Service. So news is always the thing that we sit as an anchor on. And you just saw in the presentation, one of the most widely used skills is BBC News. We've been, the sort of the default provider, the go-to people to provide news across Alexa pretty much since its inception and launch. And we're incredibly proud of that. But the BBC as a technology company itself, going back to our heritage, we have, the 1950s, we were the first people to sort of start to broadcast TV with one of the first ever Wimbledon matches that was broadcast, which was the first television broadcast. In the 70s, we pioneered CFAX, and we started to take that TV screen into the first ever piece of digital-ish stuff that could exist onto a TV screen. In the 1990s, in 1996, we launched BBC News Online. That was the first ever global online news service that really sat there and existed. And in 2000s, of course, we launched iPlayer and sort of revolutionized the world of IPTV, which previous to that was sat there as, it was like geeks in wardrobes and stuff, like downloading videos. So this was the first major broadcaster to ever truly go out and to be able to go and do that. So finding our place in this new environment, in this ambient domain, is a really significant step for us. And it is the right place for the BBC to go so that we can help continue to sort of drive innovation, work with new players who come into the markets and into our lives. But in order to be able to do that, we've got a couple of questions that we really sort of have to wrap our heads around, which is how do we kind of inform, educate and entertain in a conversational environment? And that's actually terrifying for the BBC, for any broadcaster, because as broadcasters, right, we're very good at talking to people. We're not very good at talking with people. It's all one-way communication that sort of flows. So the seismic shift that now has to happen when people can start to talk to us and they can actually ask us anything is truly terrifying, especially as you can kind of have a bit of a polarized audience when you work for the BBC. So the second question that we get is kind of how do we kind of create that technology strategy to be able to enable the conversation as well. All of our infrastructure is very much built around broadcast. If you think about what local radio is, local radio's got nothing to do about being local around you. It's about, a mast and a transmitter, and that's how far it could go and broadcast. And that was your local radio domain. So as we started going into voice, and I started the team around 18 months, 2 years ago. And the first thing that we did was, it was a BBC R&D program that came out called The Inspection Chamber, which was essentially a branched narrative story that we released on Alexa in 2017. And this was just like a prototype for us to see about, what could this mean for content? What would it mean for storytelling? What would it mean for tooling? What would it mean for all of our production workflows to be able to work and operate in this domain a little bit more? Next up, we had the main BBC skill, which we launched in December 2017. So it's been out in the wild now for 19, 20 months. And when we talked about the size of shift of audience behavior and how it started to move into voice, we have shipped now over 500 million pieces of content on Alexa. We've served something like over about 50-60 million news briefings over Alexa as well during the course of that sort of 19 months. So the audience shift that we started to see is enormous. It's really huge. It's really significant. It is literally on par and on adoption with the adoption of smartphones, as opposed to it's surpassed the kind of the adoption rate that we saw with tablets. So it becomes a really, really important new medium for us. And this is such a celebrated skill within our organization. We're really proud of the work that we do with Amazon to be able to get this out to people. Interestingly, it hasn't really been online streaming audio that it's cannibalized. It tends to have taken most of its audience behaviors away from things like DAB radio. So it's this kind of medium where we're starting to see those shifts where, we went back to the, faster, easier. It's the first time ever it's easier to actually listen to the radio than to use a radio. And that is like the big shift that goes on with it. So in September last year, we launched the CBB skill. We thought we'd give children's a bit of a whirl and see how children would start to interact with voice. And ultimately, people kind of love it. We've got a whole series of interactive games that go through, as well as all of our bedtime stories and song and dance. And we started to see, I think at the start, it's true to say it was quite slow. And lots of that was around the experience of being able to enable children's skills through Alexa. But once people started to get the habit now of how you can go about through that process, we really started to sort of like hit the hockey growth sort of curve with it. So it's an amazing experience. It's widely viewed as one of the best skills that is available on Alexa. This is one just about, if you ever want to check out the BBC's UX team and their experiences on design, they've probably picked up every single major design award that exists for designing the children's BBC skill. Yes, there has been lots of Webby Awards included that sort of came through for us as well. Then we launched another thing that was much more about trying to see how people would start to interact with new forms of content. I don't know if any of you are familiar with this. It's called The Unfortunates. And it's not just an Alexa skill. It's actually based on a book by B.S. Johnson that was written in the 60s. And it's an amazing book because it's only the first chapter and the last chapter that are bounded. The other 25 chapters you can mix around in any order at all and read the whole story through. So this was a great R&D experiment in terms of that. So you can actually essentially get over 1 million stories from the one book, is the way that it kind of works out. It's a really wonderful piece of work. And then also earlier this year, we decided to launch an interactive news pilot, which we did in India. Obviously, it was the world's biggest election, and India being India, it's full of particular challenges around the world. And we were very conscious that we've only been doing stuff in the UK to date. So it ran until the end of May on Google Assistant, and it was really there to address the kind of the concerns that we'd gone through research that was about people worrying about the disinformation economy that starts to surround things like elections. And the BBC, being one of the most trusted brands in the world, in particular for news, gave us a really great insight into how people might start to interact with voice services over mobile and also through different kind of mediums like Google Assistant, which we hadn't previously done much with. Tooling. When we first started, we very quickly realized that there was quite a lot of developer resource that was required in order to build a voice experience. And for an organization with the breadth of the BBC, that meant it was particularly unscalable. Because we just couldn't have that many developers working on creating essentially branched narratives. So we created some more stuff, which was essentially our own editorial tooling, where we're able to just essentially have producers pull in drag and drop icons. And this was a program from BBC R&D that essentially got ported across to us, and we started to put into production. So our internal producing teams now can do this, and it requires a much, much lighter load now on there. Now, of course, there were other people out there that were producing tooling to be able to build on Alexa, but the problem you get was every single company that operates in this space is just being acquired like this. Pullstring went for $100 million to Apple, and every single tooling company that existed probably about 14 months ago has now been acquired by someone else. So for an organization such as the BBC, the ability to be able to sort of have some control and consistency with tooling was really important, which is why we started to go through ourselves. So we started with a sort of 4-point sort of strategy view around what voice would kind of mean. So it started at the bottom with the sort of the say our name and we're there, which was like the BBC Radio Alexa skill. You say, hey BBC, play Radio 1, and away it goes, and we're there and we're playing Radio 1. And then we sort of created those kind of wow the world experiences that we went through with the children's and with the unfortunates. Really amazing new forms of content that allowed us to sort of push through. And currently in our journey, we're sort of at this stage 3 now, which is building a direct conversational relationship with the BBC. And if you move further forward even more still, that goes towards understanding much more the role of public services and how they start to exist within an ambient computing domain. So, making sure that we can start to bring on and we can start to bring, plenty of other things that public services in particular share, especially around things like trust with the public, data protection. It is much easier for public services to share information between each other than it is, of course, for to go out with commercial entities as well. So, what's some of the challenges? Well, when you want to get to the bananas and a couple of 800-pound gorillas in the way, it presents a lot of challenges. So much as you've got to absolutely take a hat off for the audacity of bringing voice to the market, and in particular in the speed with which both Amazon and Google have brought voice to market and how they've managed to drive so much significant change through it. That does present significant amounts of challenges, I guess, for what we would consider a healthy ecosystem. And there's no surprise there. It's a sort of, essentially, the voice market is currently more of a duopoly that really exists. And Amazon took a huge step about 2 days ago when they announced a partnership with a whole raft of other companies as well about establishing voice interoperability. So the ability for multiple voice assistants to coexist on a single piece of hardware. And that is by far and away the future that we saw and how we see that potential kind of evolving. Okay, I just talked about control in that sort of space. Got ahead of myself on the slides there a little bit. The second major problem that you get is with attribution. And this is something that obviously all people are working on. But when we kind of ask people, do you use the BBC radio skill? And we know exactly how many people use it. Only 11% of people say yes. Everybody else puts that attribution, in this case, back over to Alexa. And attribution has been quite a common problem. And that's always because attribution within voice space is actually quite a fine balancing act. Oops. It is the balancing act between attribution and discovery and ease of use. And that's the challenge that somebody asked a question here, and that's the challenge that all brands are particularly facing. As you start to sort of push your content onto these platforms, it's how do you ensure that your brand is still being recognized and not kind of just being consumed. And that is the honest truth, is when you strip away and you make everything easier, faster, and quicker, the thing is we've built and we spent a lot of time, we spent decades building amazing digital experiences online where our brands are able to flourish. And the truth is that voice cuts through all of that, okay? And it gets you to the end user to where you want to go in a very quick period of time. So it's not a case of panic, because actually people are taking a responsible approach to this and trying to find new ways to bring brands to life and to allow them, which again I think is a big part of the interoperability initiative that goes through. But there is no doubt that it's an absolute challenge that we have to do. Now, we've just gone on the front foot and we say, okay, we're going to take that on the chin. It's not going to stop us moving forward in this space. We will work through this and we will find the right ways to be able to get around it. But it has presented some challenges. And overall, over time, I must say, our attribution is now starting to increase. We're finding much better ways of engaging with people through voice, through that design process that was just talked about, around how you can start to really bring your brand to life a little bit more. It takes a lot. There's some amazing blogs from the BBC, from their UX design team, around how you can kind of go about making sure this works. So this brought us on to, hello world. Yes, a couple of weeks ago, about a week ago, we made a few waves. In journalist terms, this is what we call making waves. The BBC announced that it was making its own voice assistant. And really that's because we've had such success in kind of what we've been doing and where we've been going with voice, that it immediately started to thinkers that this is the only way that we can really kind of get into this domain and uphold our principles as a business. So the BBC exists for a few reasons. And as I said, one of them is editorial freedom. And its funding model is principle that we must have independence. We must have independence from government. We cannot be mediated by political means. And that's why the BBC's charter renewal can never fall on an election year. It's always moved so it never coincides with an election year, just to make sure there is never any political mediation of our output and our news and journalistic reporting. But likewise, we also can't have commercial mediation of our content and access to our content. So although there is always a role for us as a publisher, and just because we're building a voice assistant, don't think we're like taking or stopping working with Alexa. We're absolutely sure that that is a route where we want to publish. But what we can't do is have it as the only route in which the BBC's content becomes available to us, which is why we have to take a lot of control of what we do. And part of that drives universality quite significantly, because if you think about what it takes to build a skill on Alexa, and then you think about what it takes to build a Google action, and then if you think about what it takes to go and build whatever Apple are going to come out with Siri, and then, okay, and that's just the West Coast, okay? Then you've got Baidu, then you've got Alibaba, then you've got Tencent. These multi-billion dollar or nearly trillion-dollar Chinese companies, Asian companies that are going to come in as well, and we're going to have to start working with them as well. As soon as English is an absolute cracked problem, no problem, they will be here, okay? Because the wonderful thing about voice is the barriers to entries to it are so low. There's no £600 laptop. You don't need a £500 smartphone. You need a 48 kilobit internet connection and a microphone. That's pretty much it to be able to sort of make a voice assistant work and deliver a basic audio experience and start to enable content to the rest of the world. So this was a big area for us because ultimately we couldn't scale our content. We couldn't go out and we couldn't address multiple platforms in this way. We couldn't have that many people with just specialist skill sets in Electra and then on Google. So we needed to kind of evolve that. And that, again, stood behind our decision around making our own assistant and then working with better ways to be able to interoperate with other people to make the content available. And also, of course, it gives us much more creative control. So yes, the intents are very good that you're able to get, but where you go. But we create really deep, rich experiences. We're not a transactional company. We're not we are a people that talks to people, and we talk endlessly. What people know us for is literally putting politicians on the spot and grilling them to within an inch of their life. It's very hard to sort of deliver that kind of experience with a limited interaction model. And we have to sort of be a bit more in control of our interaction model, which means building more of a domain that is more about depth rather than breadth. So focusing what the BBC does really well. There is a number of other problems in terms of just being a publisher. If you start to look at some of these things like, Play Radio Nunga deal, Brexit cast, or questions about the BBC license fee, which is always, polarizing in terms of the way people sort of approach it. So you end up with, when you're talking to the BBC, we've got a lot of specific program titles. Our entity resolution is very, very hard, and the dialogue management that we have to have, all that has to happen with kind of like kid gloves on as we start to go through this. The potential for us to really mess this up is quite considerable and quite large. So there's a lot of care that needs to be taken in how we start to present the information and start to talk and start to consume, converse, I guess, with audience people. Personalization and recommendations. There are plenty of solutions to this, but ultimately, again, we need to be in control, really, because it's about maintaining editorial control, the thing that the BBC must kind of have, but also things like bursting filter bubbles. The BBC is one of the great people for helping you introduce serendipity into recommendations. We have a saying at the BBC, it's always brought up, it's like, how do we introduce people to Shakespeare? And it's that kind of, when you get into almost all recommendations engines, it tends to be quite a bit of the same. It's very hard to burst that filter bubble. So, we have a much stronger public purpose to introduce serendipity into the types of content that people might be exposed to. And that's how we start to affect greater change within, societal behavior. So, and of course, obviously, it's about kind of getting you to the right content as well, which, once you start engaging with the BBC, we've been broadcasting for 100 years and connecting people with content. We know how to get people to the right piece of content for what it is they want to do. And the genuine feeling here is we can do this a much better job if we kind of do that piece by ourselves. Discovery. Obviously, I pretty much just covered discovery, but it also allows us to evolve the way that we start to think about discovery, that we can start to go resolve much more down now to about entities. So it stops us thinking about programs and associations being programs, and instead starts us to think about how do we evolve now into a more knowledge-based business. There's this saying that you can't turn into a digital BBC if you just sort of switch off the airwaves and stream the telly over the internet. That does not make you a digital business. Digital businesses are about the information economy. They are understanding that data is valuable, and our job is to really help people understand that their data is valuable, and that there is things that are related to that help them find the right piece of content. So, for example, we might just want to find something funny with the woman from Fleabag, and for us, that's our piece of content, and we're the people who understand the knowledge graph and the relationship that she has with other pieces of content. It also helps us produce new forms of content. So we've been experimenting quite a lot at the moment with, how do we start to move into object-based media, internet fit radio, program segmentation. So as opposed to just consuming a program, if the Brexit cast is, or the Peter Crouch podcast is an hour long, but you've only got 15 minutes, how can we start to summarize that wealth of information that we have and condense it down into a format that is suitable for you to consume within a given time period? So that's pretty much where we kind of are with the BBC. Our role is to sit here to protect the public sphere and the national conversation. And that is one of the things that kind of gets lost in this world of kind of hyper-personalization and in AI. And that is the kind of grounding principle, I guess, that stands behind why the BBC has decided to launch its own voice assistant. So that's it from me. Questions, anyone?
How do you handle different accents?
With the same headaches that everybody else does. So we are busy sort of collecting lots of regional accents. Obviously, one of the things we really want to work to, and that we're driven to do in the UK, is to work much more at a level. As I say, it's much more about depth rather than breadth. Whereas, you have to appreciate that companies like Amazon, Google, they're trying to sort out English for the entire English-speaking world. Our focus and the thing that the license fee pay us for is to service them, in particular here within the UK, despite our reach being more global, and there are products that will go in and do that. But, we principally have to go and do that. So we do a lot of data collection, and we are doing a lot of data collection that is specific around the UK. But a lot of our focus as well always has to come into regional languages as well. So it's not just about accent, it's actually about regional languages. You've got to bear in mind, all companies, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, whoever they are, okay, it's a return on investment, and that's how they go and build a new language model. Now, for them, they have different priorities than what the BBC does. The BBC's priorities are countries like Hausa, or languages like Hausa or Somali. These are BBC World Service priority languages, because they are also priority languages and priority areas for the overall development of economies in those regions throughout the world. And the BBC exists, that's where most of our World Service content starts to become consumed. So it tends to be those languages we will focus on are the ones that most people in the world aren't going to focus on for some while, because the commercial returns that sit off the back of them is probably quite low. So our opportunity is much more about working with those people and also helping provide access to those models so that more wider commerce can flourish within those places as well. Anyone else? Man at the front, right there.
You mentioned how part of the mission is to kind of create to keep an eye on that national conversation, given the world of hyper-personalization. So that said, but often very much voice is a very personalized experience. So how do you create a very personalized experience, but not, but try to stay free of that trap of people put themselves into their little bubbles and they don't really understand the bigger picture?
Well, as we said, serendipity and introducing serendipity is one of the really big things. Hyper-personalization is very difficult and very challenging, because ultimately what you're really doing is inferring things about people and human beings. And that's okay on some levels because you don't mind. And there was a question before that came about emotion detection, right, in the previous talk. And if you think about it, it's like, you don't mind if I say, hi, I think you might like this TV program. If I go, you look angry, right? That's an entirely kind of different sort of thing. And it's one of those things that we're all going to have to sort of work through with kid gloves, all right? It's not just that the BBC's got a magical bullet. It's not just that the big tech companies can sort of like pull some magic out of the bag either. This is going to be something that we as an entire industry have to kind of gently work and gently forward ourselves against. And we're doing that a lot, one of the things that doesn't get talked about really, that would probably surprise most people, is just how many ethics in AI pieces of bodies and groups there are that spring up. Largely actually started by a lot of the big tech companies, but there's a lot of us. We report into the House of Lords in terms of their committee on ethics and AI. We submit the sort of the overall papers that go through. Obviously, Tony Hall is the sits in the House of Lords, which is always kind of handy in that if you sort of want to push that forward. But these are true problems, and for us, protecting this public sphere, what it really means is allowing people a space where they can freely communicate and freely challenge conventions and norms. Right? And you have to accept that there is only so much that a commercial enterprise is ever going to sit up and allow themselves to be absolutely panned in public by that. It is a particularly unique BBC trait that we allow that to happen. But that is essentially what protecting the public sphere is, allowing free debate to be able to come through with people. It doesn't, because of our unique funding model, it doesn't impact our business or our operations. In fact, we get it quite a lot, and that's fine. That's what it's there to do. But we do believe that principle of kind of like freedom and democracy, that everybody must have a place where they can convene, where they can have their say. So we've got a lot of things that we're thinking about when we start thinking about how will we talk with the BBC. We're also starting to think about how do we allow other people to talk together about the stuff that's going on within the BBC and within the wider world. So lots of that's coming out. We're starting to move forward now with things like interactive news. So at the moment, our news proposition is very much a sort of linear audio play out. Within the next few weeks, hopefully, scoop for you all, that there should be like a BBC interactive news services that's going to launch on Alexa as well, which we're all sort of incredibly proud with. And this will allow people to start diving down into different levels of detail and really being able to sort of get in and around the conversation rather than just have stuff broadcast at them.
Hi, thanks for your talk. I've got one really quick question and one less quick question. So the really quick question is, do you translate voice to text and then use natural language processing on that? And then the second question that maybe isn't as quick is, what data challenges do you face with the obviously huge volumes of data that you have to store and create?
Okay, quick answer is, at the moment, yes, but we haven't finalized some of our solutions. So at the moment, we're still obviously working in sort of prototyping in beta mode. So yes, at the moment, it is speech to text. And so we consume a variety of sort of, cognitive services. This isn't all technology we build ourselves. We actually work with the major technology giants to provide lots of the underlying technology that we would do. There's no point in, we're not here to spend money to compete against something that we feel is going to be a commodity over time. In that instance, we will just consume it. The specific data challenges that arise, it's a lot. And I think the big challenges that really arise are moving from that broadcast environment where all you're really doing is just collecting data to surface somebody another recommendation, versus transitioning yourself to go and work in the digital economy more, and understanding that, there suddenly just becomes a whole world of this. If you want to become a digital business, you need to understand data. You need to understand the value of data. You need to understand the value of each individual piece of data, how each individual piece of data starts to relate to other pieces of data. And you also start to have to think about, where are we going to get our data from? Yes, you can get data from consumers, but principally, digital businesses are concerned with knowledge. The internet is primarily about knowledge and utility, right? So if you want to get knowledge, the BBC has this amazing archive of content that where we can start to produce like knowledge of subjects that is far outstrips like pretty much anything. You know, Google's history of the world kind of goes back to, you know, whatever, 2001 or something like that. And apart from that, it's from digitization of various historical records. We've got programming that goes back to 1922. Gardener's Hour was broadcast in, you know, 1962. There isn't a single question about an English country garden that has never been asked in Gardener's Hour. Okay. Now, what we don't really want to do, though, or be in the place to do, is to fly over there and sort of go, here, listen to a radio program from 1962. What we want to do is use AI and machine learning to truly understand that piece of content and to be able to extract the knowledge that is contained within that, and then use things like synthetic speech generation in order to be able to read that back. So, you know, you could say, you know, differently, why is the sky blue? You know, we could point you to a Brian Cox documentary, a Radio 4 science program, or we could just understand the nature of that content and then just use a synthetic voice to read out, say, because light gets scattered in the upper atmosphere. So they are the data challenges, and it's about how we now start to transition to that digital business, and which is essentially moving from databases and pointing that, and instead now starting to work much more about knowledge graphs and how we will manage taxonomies and ontologies within knowledge graphs. Part of the problem with the BBC, we're very siloed, so all of news stuff is very newsy, and it's editorially like tagged. Its taxonomies are based around news. Sport is taxonomies are based around sport. So there isn't this kind of like consistent approach at the moment that goes with it. So we've got a huge program of work to sort of like bring consistency in our data, first and foremost, and then we can start to transition that into understanding the ontologies between those taxonomies as well.
Thank you very much.
Cool. Thank you.